Okay, welcome. This is almost an entire month since the last emergency assistance workshop that we did together. Again, this workshop is meant to focus on small nonprofits, worker cooperatives, and incorporated entities, arts groups, and the self-employed. But there'll be information in here for obviously small businesses as well. We have split it up into speakers speaking about different topics. Anything from loans that are available, grants that are available on the federal and local levels, also from private foundations and public foundations, as well as new information that has rolled out for those who are self-employed. Everything that we're offering today as far as advice is not official legal or financial advice, but the presenters that are presenting have done as much research as possible to give you the latest information that is out there. And then they also have their own expertise as well that they'll share. My name is Sarah Scruggs with the Northern California Land Trust, and I will pass it off now to Ian Winters from the Northern California Land Trust to give us an overview. And then we'll go on to other presenters after that.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. And thanks also to everybody who's been part of our workshop team. It's great seeing this workshop come together. So a little bit about kind of what our framework was today. You know, these workshops came about because many of us and many of our residents are artists and self-employed people and run small studios and have bodywork practices or small construction companies or restaurants or you name it. Many of our residents in the community do all of the things that make the Bay Area special. And a lot of those small business types are tough to get assistance for in the current climate, which led us to start trying to put together this program. So a few things at a very high level about how we've been trying to think about things that all the rest of the presenters will go through in more detail are, one of the first things is to think about what is your business structure. And I say that in quotes because, you know, many of us might think, oh, I don't really have a business, or we're absolutely opposed to the capitalist model and we have refused to become an incorporated group, you know, when we operate on an entirely collective basis. In this sense, the business does not mean whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. It's thinking about what is, for the purposes of the kinds of programs that there are, what is your structure? And you know, you will have some structure whether or not you really want to. So some of the things you can start thinking about, if you don't know, if you haven't really thought about this, is do you have employees? Is sort of one of the first things to look at. So are you employing and giving a paycheck to other people? Or are you what's called a sole proprietor? You just employ yourself. So that breaks out a bunch of different options. And the other sort of structural question is, are you a nonprofit? Are you a for-profit? And are you formally organized? Meaning, did you go through and incorporate the entity that you are all part of, or create something like an LLC or a social club or a trust? Many ways that you may have set something up to be able to share work and expenses with other people. And all of those will inform how some of these different programs work. And again, other people will go into sort of the more details of the eligibility for them. So there's several different programs that we'll touch on. One is the Paycheck Protection Program, which has been heavily in the news, and you know, I'll say it could help a lot of people or a lot of businesses. It's not been a straightforward rollout at best. Um, so, you know, we'll just want to be upfront about that, that many people have been deeply frustrated with the program, and it continues to be troubled even though it has been refunded. That said, it's worth considering. Then there's another program that's called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan and Grant Advance. And that was also the grant advance piece is the $10,000 of absolutely free money guaranteed in 3 days that you may have heard about. And again, that was also a program that, and is a program that's underfunded, but some people have gotten advances. They are now being done at $1,000 per employee mostly. And then there's a larger disaster loan program that has been refunded. But again, you know, people can talk more about the details of how money is flowing there. And then there's a couple more less high profile things. One is the family leave tax credits. So again, if you employ people, there are now tax credits that the employer can get to offer family leave. For example, if you have to take care of children and can't work because schools are closed. And then there's a program for if you weren't able to take advantage of the PPP program, there's a thing called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. And for larger businesses, this might not be that much help. But if you're, say, running a small arts cooperative, the credit provides you 50% of an employee's wages up to $10,000. So a $5,000 credit per employee for keeping someone on payroll. And, you know, again, that's something to look at. Does the kind of structure you have, might it make it possible that, you know, especially if you say have like a dance company with many dancers that might get $1,500 a season. Well, here might be a way to be able to pay them and have a lot of it funded through the IRS. And finally, there's a whole long list of local resources and programs, some of which are really coming through for people, as well as the self-employed unemployment expansion, or pandemic unemployment, which has finally kicked off this week as of Tuesday, and is a real thing. And let's see, I think the last thing I was supposed to mention is the Eviction Moratorium, which Jasmine will talk a little bit more about. But the main thing we wanted to remind people of is the moratorium is truly in effect, but there is a loophole where you could be evicted on health and safety grounds. So, you know, which we mentioned primarily because there are a lot of people in the arts community and sort of warehouse living community that have had difficult relationships with property owners who have often been evicted on health and safety grounds. So all evictions are paused until 90 days after the state of emergency, except for ones on health and safety grounds. And the other thing to remember about that is that it's pausing the eviction process. It is not providing rent relief. So at the end of that time, there will be an as yet unknown process where all of that rent that's been accrued, unless you've made some other arrangements, will end up coming due. So that's which, you know, there's other sort of political processes to talk about that, but we're for right now, wanting to just make sure people know the information of what the current situation is. So with that, I think that's most of what I was going to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. And Sorry, I didn't mention this at the front. If people do have questions, we're going to let the speakers present first and then take those afterwards. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will start taking those once we get through all the different sections. Both on the Spanish side, we'll take questions from there, and then the chat on the English side. And William Hobbs, who joined us during the last emergency assistance call to talk about small business administration programs. He works for the Community Bank of the Bay, really wanted to be with us today, but is working so many hours trying to deal with the issues around the Small Business Administration Program and getting so much money out the door in such a short window of time. The initial round of funds that had been passed by Congress for small business administration programs was completely run through within 2 weeks. And I know that a lot of people on this call probably applied. I hope that some of you did receive funding, but a lot of people did not. And it was really inequitably distributed and a lot of problems with the program. Congress passed on the 24th of April, another $320 billion in assistance meant to go to the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Advocacy efforts led to about $60 billion of that amount of money going to community banks, credit unions, and community development financial institutions, which more closely work with local small businesses, nonprofits, and other folks on the ground, especially those that are run by people of color. So the hope is that this will lead to a more equitable distribution of funds. But Will Hobbs from the Community Bank of the Bay, he sent me some information this morning, and he just said that it's been very frustrating to try to deal still with questions that they have about the program, with the Small Business Administration rolling things out so quickly. They had 450 applications and they were only able to fund 130 people from the first round. And so they're going through another round of applications, but with the same amount of staff that they've had in the past and not being able to ramp up capacity. So that's the information that he wanted to pass on from the community bank side. The capacity is low and they're working as fast as they can. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, they're not currently accepting new applications. So if you've already submitted an application, they'll continue to process through those on a first come, first served basis. As Ian mentioned, the advance is up to $10,000, but it is now new guidance, $1,000 per employee that's been on the payroll since January 30th. And self-employed and sole proprietors and independent contractors do count only as one employee. That loan advance upon approval of the application doesn't have to be repaid. If there is a loan amount beyond that advance, the terms for a for-profit business is 3.75% interest rate, up to 30 years, nonprofits 2.75% interest rate. So if you haven't already applied for that, it doesn't look like there is a way for you to do so. And to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, Sarah Lockhart from Safer DIY Spaces.
Yes,
yeah,
I'm here.
I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Okay, my name is Sarah Lockhart and I work for Safer DIY Spaces. We were actually formed as a disaster relief organization after Ghost Ship back in 2016. Most of our work involves artists and low-income people in non-conforming spaces, basically like non-conventional live work spaces like warehouse spaces. So when the eviction moratorium was passed, I sort of looked at it and noticed the health and safety loophole that they could evict you from. And that does, as Ian mentioned earlier, could affect a lot of people or people you know. And if you are in that situation, feel free to contact us through our website at saferdiyyspaces.org. If you're in a residential situation, reach out to one of the great tenants' rights free legal aid organizations here in the Bay Area. So one of the things, before I sort of get into the nuts and bolts of the Paycheck Protection Program and what it does and how to fill out the forms, there are sort of a few things that Ian touched on that are sort of important to keep in mind. And basically the main concept is the relationship between the business and the worker or the person that does the work, right? So there are programs that basically are giving money to people for just being people and normal living expenses. And those are the stimulus checks that have been going out and that people have been complaining about. They log onto the system and they say status not available, and they get unhappy about that and have various ideas about why their status is not available. So those funds are going to people for being people. The Paycheck Protection Program is designed to help businesses pay workers for working. And their idea of the relationship between business and worker is that the worker is an employee of the business. So there is an element of control of the business to the worker. So there are a lot of organizations where they pay people as independent contractors and not as employees. And there was some confusion about this at the beginning when they launched the program, partially because some of the language that was used in terms of what documents to have available. But the guidance and the rules have been set is that you cannot count people you pay as 1099 contractors towards the Paycheck Protection Program. Those people are not eligible. The amount you paid them does not factor into the equation. So if you happen to be a business entity with no employees, you would not be eligible unless you are the business entity and you work for yourself. There's a lot of confusion about where it will ask for payroll and number of people on payroll. And if you're filing as a self-employed person, the number of people on payroll would be 1, which would be you. And the amount of payroll when they're looking for historical data is going to be based on your Schedule C for 2019. They're going to look at that. If you don't have your taxes done for 2019 and you don't even have a sort of a Schedule C done for 2019, I would strongly advise you put that together before applying, because they're going to ask for that document. The other thing that's happened since our last workshop is that the Paycheck Protection Program is not just going through banks. A lot of the problems that people had is that they did not have business accounts with banks that valued them as customers, let's say. So they ended up basically not being able to apply. Now you can apply through, if you don't have a business account, but you do things like, have online sales, or have a relationship with, PayPal or Square, or use QuickBooks Online for stuff. Cabbage is also one of those. And from what I've heard from people, those entities are also been fairly responsive, pretty responsive to processing applications for, very small businesses, sole proprietor type entities. I sort of switched around. I sort of went into the funding concepts before talking about the paycheck protection things. So another thing that was clarified recently is partnerships. I don't know how many people here have partnerships. If you happen to be just have an EIN and are a cooperative and aren't set up as officially an unincorporated association, or even if you are an unincorporated association, if you're not a corporation and you are multiple people, the IRS basically de facto classifies you as a partnership. and you should be filing Form 1065 and issuing K-1s to your members. So basically, if you have a situation like that and the members of your co-op are paid essentially, as sole proprietors, like through 1099s, or just given cash and are not employees, but are paid for their services, you're a partnership and you could get a loan through the Paycheck Protection Program based on the partnership, the income from the partnership on the K-1. I think I've, oh, another thing. So one of the things that's really, people are still very confused about, and it's very unclear, is because they have actually started issuing the payroll protection loans to self-employed people. And one of the issues is loan forgiveness and what you need to provide and how you calculate loan forgiveness. If you have employees that you pay with a W-2, it is fairly easy because you have payroll records. If you are self-employed and they're going to be basing that on your net income from your 2019 Schedule C, how do you calculate that loan forgiveness? Like what counts as payroll, and how do you prove that you paid yourself that amount from the loan proceeds to continue to conduct your business? And that is one of those things where that part haven't quite been figured out yet, and there isn't official guidance on that. A lot of people are sort of guessing. People are advising to have a business account for your business and then basically transfer money from a business account to a personal account. Where that specifically says, owner's draw, so it's clear that you're paying yourself, so that could qualify. Again, that guidance has not been issued yet, and a lot of people in the accounting and legal profession are very irritated by this.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And we will be sharing the handout that you're seeing that has resources at the end of this call and putting it online, as well as sharing the recording. So I'd like to pass it off to Suki O'Kane to speak about the City of San Francisco and emergency funding for artists and art organizations.
Thanks, Scruggs. Suki, I'm with ATA. We're a 35-year plus radical art collective organized as a nonprofit at 21st and Valencia. So I come here as a tiny nonprofit called a micro nonprofit. I'm also a practicing artist in Oakland, but I happen to have been tracking what's going on in San Francisco. I'm glad that we have the notes in front of you, so we'll try to highlight some of the things that you should know about getting support in San Francisco. In general, San Francisco has a larger menu of options for small businesses and sole proprietors. They're inventing new work every day. Keep checking the Office of Economic and Workforce Development website. You see the URL there, I'll put it in the chat window. There was a great program, the Hardship Emergency Loan Program. There were 0 interest loans, and it's closed as of April 22nd. However, they do have resources for sole proprietors and independent contractors that they keep updating very frequently. There's going to be a link in your resource document for these resources. They have announced a new mini grant program that's focused on neighborhoods and also those historically underserved communities and women-owned businesses. So if you are a sole proprietor and a woman, you might be interested and you're living in these neighborhoods. The award amounts vary between $1,000 and $10,000, but they can be used for the things that are important to you. If you have payroll, if you have employees, rent, utilities, or to supplement your income because you've lost revenue. And I appreciate what Sarah Lockhart was saying about navigating these systems. It can be really hard. And Land Trust we're trying to do our part as a consortium to assist you, but in your resource document, you will see a list of many organizations in San Francisco that have started to do this work, and not merely in English, but to support Spanish speakers, Chinese speakers, Vietnamese, speakers as well. So that I urge you to contact local nonprofits that are ready to assist you when you're ready to do your work. I will mention that the San Francisco Foundation, in addition to their grant making, is partnering with the Financial Management Associates and the Tipping Point Community, another grant maker. They're in the middle of a webinar series that's free. It's meant for small and mid-sized Bay Area nonprofits. If that's how you're organized, then you might want to follow the link and jump in. They already started on Wednesday, but I'm sure they'll make resources available for you. And it allows a nonprofit to do some planning around all of these programs and get a new perspective on how to fiscally manage a nonprofit organization. Meanwhile, what if you're an individual artist and on arts organizations? What's going on in San Francisco today? There are still grant programs and some loan programs that are coming online. Most of them ask for donations first, and then they give the money out in tiny increments, and they run out of money, they pause. Then they ask for more donations and they open again. But I will say, this Monday, the Bay Area Arts Worker Relief Fund opened up. If you are in the visual, or let's just say, if you are a performing or musical artist, you can apply through Theater Bay Area. If you're any other type of artist, apply through Independent Arts and Media. In the resource document, and I'll put in the chat window, I believe I'll put the URLs in there after I finish this presentation. But actually, I want to conclude right here just so we have enough time for Jasmine to start talking about what's going on in the East Bay. So that's it for me. Jasmine, you ready to go?
Yes, thank you, Suki. Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Poyawan. I'm an attorney at the East Bay Community Law Center. We're a nonprofit legal aid organization in Berkeley, the largest free legal services provider in Alameda County. So before I go into Oakland and Berkeley resources, as well as talk about the unemployment benefits expansion, I want to follow up on some of the key points of the emergency eviction moratoriums that Ian had mentioned. We work specifically in Berkeley and Oakland, and so I think it's key to remember that eviction moratorium policies vary by local city, and so depending on whether you're in Berkeley or Oakland, this information may or may not apply to you. But essentially what Ian said was spot on about how the moratorium covers commercial and residential tenants. There are exceptions. The one that he had mentioned about if you're a threat to safety or health of the building or other tenants. But another exception that are both in Berkeley and Oakland are Ellis Act evictions. Essentially, if your landlord decides to take the property off the rental market for at least 10 years, then they are allowed to evict during this time. But for the most part, if landlords do evict, they cannot evict based on non-payment of rent due to income lost as a result of COVID. Another last point that I want to make is that even with these eviction moratoriums in place, landlords can still file for evictions, which is not the greatest thing, but there's no way for cities to prevent that. That has to be prevented on the state level, which hasn't been. So with that said, if you do receive an eviction notice, I'll include this link in the handout, but there are a list of legal aid organizations here in the East Bay that can assist with responding, because you want to make sure you respond to the eviction notice despite there being an eviction moratorium in place. So those were the two things I wanted to mention on that before jumping into resources. So this is, as many of you know, this is the second iteration of this workshop. The first iteration, I had touched upon Berkeley and Oakland resources. In Berkeley, the main resource that's available to existing businesses and nonprofits, and hopefully in the future, also sole proprietors and folks who are self-employed, are what they call the business continuity grants. As of today, they still have yet to open up their second round of applications. Their first round of applications closed in early April, and so we're hoping that Berkeley will raise enough or more funding in order to open a second round. And I know there's interest in that. But in this handout, you can see what the existing criteria was for these grants initially. But like I said, for the second round, there have been talks about extending these grant opportunities to also people who are self-employed or who don't fall under the neat criteria of business or nonprofit organization. In terms of Oakland, instead of going kind of line by line on the resources available, I just included the main website, which includes federal, state, and local resources that the City of Oakland has put together. They even have a great link specifically for self-employed artists, cultural workers, and I looked through the resources recently, and as of this morning, there are still a few grant opportunities that are still available. So I would, if you fall under the categories of being a worker, artist, or arts or nonprofit, I would check out this link. The City of Oakland was partnering or did partner with an organization called Working Solutions. They were able to give out loans or grants, I believe, of up to $500 or a total $500,000, but they are still soliciting more funding in order to come up with a second round. And so I would just keep checking their website. In the meantime, there are zero interest business loans being offered by Kiva. There are also non-local or even state specific resources on the website provided by different organizations, from Salesforce to Facebook, who are offering small but helpful grants to business owners and people who are self-employed. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about the unemployment expansion. So these are the unemployment benefits that have been passed through the Federal CARES Act. So as many of you perhaps have experienced, as someone who's self-employed or someone who owns their own business, you're typically not eligible for regular unemployment insurance or unemployment benefits. And so the CARES Act addressed that by creating the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, PUA, which increased unemployment benefits and also expanded those benefits to persons who normally would not qualify. Eligibility includes just business owners, self-employed individuals, independent contractors. But the main thing here is that in order to be eligible for PUA, you must not be able to qualify for regular unemployment insurance benefits in California, or disability insurance or paid family leave. And so this doesn't mean that you shouldn't or can't have ever received regular unemployment insurance benefits. It could also mean that you've reached your maximum benefits and are no longer eligible for the regular benefits, but for the most part, if you're already receiving regular unemployment insurance benefits, you are not eligible for the extended benefits through the PUA program. Another main thing for eligibility is that your loss of work or the factors contributing to you being underemployed or having partial unemployment must be related to COVID-19. And on the EDD website, or the California's Employment Development Department website, there's a long list of what related to COVID-19 means. That could mean that you have to be a primary caregiver because of the closure of schools. That could mean that you've lost contracts because of COVID specifically. But that list is on EDD, and I think it's just important to note that you will have to show some correlation to it. Another thing that the CARES Act passed is that benefits have increased by $600 per week. What that means is that if you are receiving unemployment insurance benefits, whether that be regular or even PUA, you will get $600 tacked on to your weekly benefit per week, which could be a huge help for folks. But in addition to that, the amount of time you're able to receive unemployment has also been extended an additional 13 weeks. And so total, that would be maximum 39 weeks, since the regular state provided unemployment benefits is a maximum 26 weeks. Under the federal legislation, it's important to note that if you have the ability to telework with pay, or if you are receiving sick leave or other paid leave benefits, you are not entitled to the PUA, which I guess is sort of redundant from the information up top. So once you determine whether you're eligible or not, if you are to go forward with applying, the great news is that California EDD has begun accepting applications as of April 28th, so a few days ago. It says on the website that the fastest way to apply is through their online user interface, the UI online. But you can also apply by phone, mail, or fax, but just take note that that might take a while given the high load and demand that the EDD is facing right now. If you're confused whether you're supposed to file for a regular claim or a PUA claim, the great thing about the online interface is that based on the information that you include, it will determine automatically whether or not it's a regular claim or a PUA claim. And all of this information is available on the EDD website, but basically to prepare, you want to make sure that you have your proof of citizenship and work authorization, that you have information on employment history from the last 18 months. That's key because that's the information that the EDD will use to determine your weekly benefits. If you're a former federal employee or have served in the military in the last 18 months, there are also special documents you must provide, as well as identification documents like your state ID or driver's license. And this is great information provided. I have not actually went through the portal or the application process, so thank you for who included this information. But thank you, Sarah. Awesome. Thanks for waving. Thank you, Sarah Lockhart, for including this. But currently, the UI online portal is not available 24/7. And so if you're a night owl, don't expect to be able to file between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And I think I heard from discussion earlier, Sarah saying that there are real about it, that you know, even if you're 2 minutes or a minute after 10, the application will be closed. However, you will be allowed to resume where you left off if that ever happens to you. Another important thing, and we had this question come up a lot in our first iteration about if you qualify for a regular unemployment insurance claim, can you also apply for PUA? And I think because of the eligibility criteria, it's advised not to apply for both or not to double dip. But let's say you did file for a regular unemployment insurance claim and they told you that you don't get any award or you have a $0 award, then EDD does say that you may apply for a PUA claim as long as you have not requested a wage investigation as a result of that $0 award. And so should be in the clear if you don't have the regular UI benefits. So just a little bit more information. Because the PUA benefits were designed to get to individuals as soon as possible, as long as you provide all of the required information on the application, the goal for EDD is to pay people between 24 and 48 hours after they apply. And so what that means is that they'll pay you the minimum weekly benefit, which is $167 per week. And then if you were unemployed from March 29th, between March 29th and July 25th, for those weeks, you'll also get the added $600 per week on top of that. And, you know, let's say you were owed more than $167. Once the EDD processes your application, they'll be able to pay you the difference between what you're owed. But again, the minimum, absolute minimum is $167 per week. And then, let's see. Yeah, thanks, Sarah, I'm assuming, again, for this info, but it is the minimum payment, $167. If your earnings are approximately $17,500 or less for the year, you'll get the minimum payment plus the additional $600 per week. And that $600 per week, again, is only for the weeks starting March 29th until July 25th. And then if you make more than $17,500, you'll receive additional money. So that's basic info. I know last time folks had like very specific questions about their specific situations, and we're happy to answer that at the end of the presentation, but I'm going to pass it right back to Sarah.
Hey, thanks, Jasmine. Just a few things to add. I helped a friend who walked through submit her claim a couple days ago, and this is where I got this information about how the portal works. So, you know, there are things that they ask that are obvious questions, and there are things they ask that could be slightly confusing. To reiterate what Jasmine said, they really want to steer as few people towards the PUA claims, the self-employed pandemic UA claims, and towards regular unemployment benefits as possible. So probably because it's a new system and they have to do more verification. So, you know, unfortunately you can't sort of get both, because a lot of people on our last meeting and our last workshop were in the situation where they did have the mixture of self-employed income and wages from side jobs and partial employee jobs. So from what it sounds like, and what the EDD is saying, is that if you do qualify for unemployment based on those small amount of wage jobs, then you're sort of basically getting that, and you wouldn't be getting the other form of unemployment assistance, though depending, you could theoretically exhaust the regular one and end up qualified for the PUA that again is one of those unclear things. Another thing I want to cover, should mention, is if you are a student. Some people might be part-time in school but also be employed, or have finished school and be in the past, you know, either this semester or are planning on starting school in the fall, and they're going to ask questions. They're going to ask you actually about your class schedule and the days and hours in which you attended school. So if you are or were recently a student this semester, that's something you're going to have to put in. The other thing they're going to ask for is for the self-employed people, they're going to ask about your income. And it's in the help screen, but basically they're asking again for the net income from self-employment on your 2019 Schedule C. So that is what I have to add about the self-employed unemployment benefits. Other things that came up that Ian mentioned that we haven't gone through yet. He mentioned the employee retention credit, and he also mentioned the the Families First leave credits. And he mentioned family leave, but there's also general paid leave, which we covered, talked about in the last one. Really, it's something that's for employees. So if you are not an employee or are not an employer of employees, it wouldn't be germane, relevant to what's going on. But the paid leave amount, and this is something that wasn't entirely clear initially, is that basically you can get refundable leave, basically paid leave for 2 weeks of each employee's regular salary or expected hours at the time, and that gets refunded, as well as the family leave for if you are in a situation where your child's school or daycare has been closed and you can't work because you are suddenly a stay-at-home parent. And that gets you a refundable credit, or your employer a refundable credit of basically 2/3 of what the salary is. It is my understanding that you could combine that with the Paycheck Protection Program loan to cover the extra third from the family leave that isn't from the credit. So that's another thing. And so with the employee retention credit versus the paid leave stuff, and the PPP things, I think the one thing you really need to look at if you are in that position is you want to look at what type of staffing you have. So the employee retention credit is good if you have multiple employees, but they're all part-time and they don't make the most money. Because the credit is sort of based on a per employee basis. If you're a small nonprofit that has, 1 or 2 staff that are pretty much full-time and don't have numerous part-time employees, the other programs might give you more bang for your buck. But I think before you sort of plan on whichever one you decide to go for, you should do a little bit of math, or if you are loath to do any math whatsoever, find somebody who likes to do math and have them do some calculations for you. So I think those are the questions of things I'm going to cover. The stimulus payments are going out. There are a lot of people going, where's my money? How come I don't get money? When does the money come? The IRS is doing this stuff in phases, so they keep refreshing the system and they add more.
Sorry, Sarah,
layers.
real quick. There's a request to go just a little bit slower.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay.
It's okay.
All right. So for the stimulus payments, a lot of people who have filed already, have received, a lot of people have received their payments already. And those are people who have, the first several batches of checks went to people who had filed tax returns for 2018, 2019, or both. You don't have to have filed your 2019 tax return yet to get a stimulus payment. filing a 2019 tax return, if you have already filed a 2018 tax return, is not going to make you get your money faster. Basically be patient. If you have filed and you, in the past, you owed, a lot of it is they don't have the bank information in there. The two categories of people that I want to make sure sort of know or aware of the problems that they might face are people who have been recently divorced. If the last tax return you have on file have you filing married with your ex, and there is no subsequent bank information, that money is going to go to you jointly. So in that case, I would encourage filing a 2019 tax return as a no longer married to that person status, whether you're single or head of household, so that you're not in that situation. That's the main one. The other thing that the IRS has been doing is, and I don't know how many people have received these payments, is that they are issuing payments to dead people. If you, and they want them back. For most of the situations, you might be getting payments that are in excess of what you would, in theory, be due. Like if they overpay you, you don't have to pay it back unless you are dead. So if you happen to be, have somebody in your household or be a trustee for a person who is recently deceased, don't cash that check if it's in a bank account. If it was direct deposited, don't transfer it. Just don't do anything with the money. The IRS is going to want that money back. I believe that's what I've covered, everything that's with the stimulus payments that hasn't already gotten dealt with since the last workshop.
Thank you. I know that this is a lot of information and some people have been asking their questions in the chat and presenters have been answering. There are a few that I noticed we haven't gotten to yet. And feel free to add more questions to the chat as well. And then we'll also, if you don't have access to the chat, after we ask these first few questions, I'll ask if there's anybody that wants to just ask their question normally using your voice. So first question, are small business owners eligible for pandemic unemployment assistance if they have already been turned down for a small business loan?
Yes.
Yes, I just answered.
Oh, and you just answered that.
Sorry.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, another question. What if someone has moved since their last tax return and that one was done through paper and the return was sent as a check?
As in the person has filed, if the person has filed their 2019 return and since moved, hopefully the forwarding order from the post office would still be good. If they're talking about their 2018 tax return filed last year, and it's been a significant time since they've moved, it would be a good time to file the current year tax return. I'm not entirely sure whether if you filed for an extension showing the new address, they would pick that up and then send the check to the new address. That is a question I don't know the answer to, and I'm not sure if they figured that one out yet.
Regarding the direct deposit info, they will send hard checks. If you've paid taxes via check, they will send you a hard check back and not use the direct deposit route, despite what's on the website.
Are there others on the call that would like to unmute themselves and ask a question that way?
I would like to ask, How do we know whether an application is actually in the works? I've applied to 3 different, so the Community Bank of the Bay is our bank, and they couldn't accept any more people. And so I, tried various other ones, but I really don't know if we're actually in the works or not with anybody. So should I just keep applying to people on that list of the institutions that can handle these requests, or?
Are we talking about payroll protection program loans?
Yes.
From what I understand and from what I've been told, if your application has been submitted, they will give you some sort of, the bank or lending institution will give you a document that says your application has been submitted. There has been issues with the SBA receiving multiple applications for the same person because the way that the banks have been dealing with it. So you can apply twice or more than once through different entities, but they do have measures in place to, of course, prevent people from, gaming the system and getting more money than they're entitled to. So, if you don't have any kind of confirmation number or any indication that your application has been submitted, definitely keep trying and finding someone that will do that for you. If you have one where there is a confirmation number and they say it's in process or that it has been submitted to the SBA, I would go back and contact those lenders, because it's like you're sending multiple copies of the same email essentially. So it's like there's a duplication error.
That's not my intention. It's just because
Oh, no, exactly. I'm just saying the SBA will be confused, and if you've applied multiple times, it might hold up you actually getting funding.
All right. Okay. All right.
And also, this is Ian, just when you go through the PPP process, at a certain point with the lender, you will get a link to some type of web portal where you start putting in all of your application information. And until you've completed that process, and the portal is going to be different depending on the lender, you complete that process, you hit submit, and at some point that lender will send you a confirmation number back or a submission number. Once you get that submission number, you have applied to the SBA. If you haven't gotten that yet, your application probably has not been submitted and you haven't actually made one. And if you haven't gotten even to a link to fill a much more in-depth thing out on a lender's portal, you haven't even really started an application. You've just talked to lenders about maybe doing it.
I did get the link and we did complete that, but I don't think we got a submission number back.
Got it. Yeah, so I would just say keep trying, and once you haven't really had a submission until you get that number back from the SBA.
Okay, thank you so much. That's exactly what I didn't know.
Are there others on the call that have questions that you'd like to speak out? Well, if there's anything that does come up after this call, we're going to be sending out the handout that's been on your screen, which also has a list of resources at the end and a recording from the last workshop. And then we'll also send out the chat itself. And if anything does come up for you, please go ahead and email back, and we will try to get back to you with any sort of answer or direction that you need to go to research more. There is one more question here that's in the chat. If we need any assistance filing for pandemic unemployment assistance, is there a resource? Jasmine or Sarah, what would you say about that in addition to what's in this document?
As in, like getting help filling out the application and answering questions,
Yeah.
like what it means. I would hope and imagine that there are organizations that help people do that. That's might be a better Jasmine question than a me question.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know any off the top of my head. I know legal aid at work helps with like the regular unemployment, filing for regular unemployment benefits. Yeah, I will get back to you actually, and I'll do more thinking around it. But perhaps you can also reach out to legal aid at work. I'll check in with them to see what they're doing with the new PUA.
Scruggs, if you scroll up to those San Francisco-based organizations that are giving assistance too, it's definitely worth a call to them.
Okay.
Mission Economic Development Agency. If they don't know, they'll refer you. There was a pop-up for me. Wow,
Great.
we have a lot in there.
Yeah, I mean, this document is 12 pages.
The other place I would say in the East Bay would be the Unity Council in Fruitvale.
That's a good one.
They do a lot of kind of individual financial counseling.
And then the EDD website also does have a list of worker centers that are located in different places that you could reach out to as well. That would be another resource and a place to look. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for everyone who joined us today, for all of the presenters. Again, we'll be reaching out to you afterwards with all of this information and the recording itself that you can go back to and pass around. Have a good and powerful May Day, and stay in there with another month of shelter in place. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.